Lightning like Steve McQueen. I'm in the fast lane when the light turns green. And I built tough, I ain't nothing but grit. Cause I made rugged blood, sweat, and spit. Yeah, like a horse I fly. Better push yourself in for a bumpy ride. I like to play hard, but I work harder. And I weather the storm cause I'm built stronger.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals because at the end of the day, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve. So you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. We're just going to jump right in. I got a very special guest coming back on. This is like her third time on the show, but she's like kind of like my resident maritime expert at this point because she's a lawyer. She's a lawyer I actually like as well. So I'm going to put that out there. But we're just, again, we're here to talk about what's going on at the ports, but most importantly, some potential like recourse on what people can do in the event that this does go through with the strike. So with that being said, I got Lauren Beagen, the Maritime professor, back on the show. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I always love being on your show. You have the best listeners, the best candid conversations. I love it.
I appreciate that. No, I did not pay her to say that. But no, I think like people just crave reality in today's day and age, Lauren, and there's no filter, there's no agenda, there's no ultimately, hey, we did all this, no, buy this course from us or anything like that.
Exactly, right?
It's really, just about bringing different professionals from different walks of the transportation industry to come on and speak about that. Like I had Sarah Dandan on yesterday and we were breaking down kind of like the D&D aspect of things, but then most importantly, like, hey, how can people be better prepared for it? But now we're like, I really want to focus on like kind of like the legal recourse action of what might happen here. And again, there's this, none of what we talk about on the show should be perceived as legal advice at all. This is just Lauren's an attorney. This is an opinion, and then this is an opinion only on this. But with that being said, like what's going on here? What are you hearing? You're as connected into the port world as anybody I know. So like, what are you hearing out there right now?
Yeah, so I'm sure that you've been talking about this all week, right? The International Longshoremen's Association and the U.S. Maritime Alliance have a master contract that expires September 30th. And what happens October 1 at 12:01? The ILA has said that they plan to strike. And so here we are, less than a week away from October 1, 12:01. And I've been hopefully optimistic, but honestly, the closer we get, the more it looks like we are going toward a strike. Yeah. Now, the real question becomes, how long does that strike go on? And I think that's really the big question. But the ILA and the Maritime Alliance have repeatedly in public forums, and that's kind of how they're talking to each other, unfortunately, right now, is through media announcements, that they are at an impasse. That word has been used multiple times, that they are at an impasse over what they're negotiating. And so all of that combined, I hate to say it, but it looks like we're probably heading toward a strike.
Yeah. And I feel the same way, right? Because it's like, I do read actually, and I try and research about as much as I possibly can on a lot of this stuff. And I try and look for, all right, what are some key words that other unions have put out in the media when they were at an impasse? And I would always see like, oh, we're optimistic, we're going to come to an agreement. I've never seen, like you brought up the word impasse. I've never seen that word used as much in any other public forum that I have up until like kind of like right now with this. And it does seem that way, right? And I don't want it to happen. Obviously I'm not sitting here hoping, but I also look at it like we've known about this for like months at this point. Like, hey, this is coming up, and it kind of seems like now that we're at the kind of the final hour, that it's all but likely going to happen. But what contingency plans are at place? And, I wanted to ask you this, like, because you see articles out there about ships rerouting. It does, like, or if there's any ship that say already got a dock schedule in Jacksonville, are they able to reroute at all in the event that there's a strike, or are they stuck offshore until this is resolved?
So it depends, right? That's always the law. And like you said from the outset, right? None of this is legal advice. This is just general discussion. If you need an attorney, hire an attorney. So it depends, right? So in general, when the vessels are loaded, they're loaded with kind of a certain route and certainly a certain location of offloading enumerated, right? That's part of the agreement. Can they divert? There's some of the carriers who are putting out diversion charges. And so that says to me that they're willing to do diversions on their cargo. The other things, I mean, it's not like you can just hop over one or two ports or one or two towns down and now you're in a port that's not under the strike. We're looking at the Panama Canal in the meantime or in between. And so the Panama Canal has had its own problems throughout the past few years. Now it seems like it's on a better trajectory. We're kind of getting back to normal there. But what was happening was the main lake that they were pulling the water from to help work those locks was in a drought. And so they weren't able to effectively utilize the locks as well as they had before. So they were having draft restrictions. They were having number of vessels going through restricted. Like I said, that seems to be alleviating. But the point being, you can't just hop over. You're going to have to go through the Panama Canal. And that's not, as always, a simple a thing. Or you're going to have to reroute the entire world, right? And instead of going through, a way that takes you maybe more through the Atlantic, maybe you're going to be looking at more of a Pacific route, which might be a little bit longer. So everything is kind of about hedging bets right now. And so you start to say, okay, is the strike going to happen? The closer we get to it, not a certainty. They could strike an agreement at any point.
Yeah.
The closer we get to it, the more it looks like a strike is going to happen. And so, meaning that from the two sides and the language that's being released, it seems like they are at this impasse that they keep mentioning. The other option is that the Biden-Harris administration could jump in. They have the Taft-Hartley Act, which can basically pause the strike, make sure that the workers go back to work, not going into too many specifics about it, but it has to do with the labor and it has to do with kind of a cool down period or forcing mediation or somehow alleviating the disruption that might happen. Yeah. The Biden-Harris administration, there was an unnamed official that came out in reports maybe last week that said they've never invoked it. They're not looking to do that now. And so that on top of it says to me, okay, well, they didn't have to take a position, but this unnamed official said that they weren't interested in using Taft-Hartley. So perhaps they are extra heading toward a strike. And so if they're heading toward a strike, what do? Do you reroute? Do you divert? Do you have all these extra charges? Do you wait? Because I mean, just because they have a strike doesn't mean it automatically goes for a month. It could go for a day or two. And what I'm hearing, and who knows, right? Everybody is just an opinion right now, unless you're in the negotiating room. And even then they don't know.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing is that perhaps a week, perhaps by the end of the week, it'll be buttoned up, whether that is Taft-Hartley intervention by the administration, or perhaps they come to an agreement. Perhaps the pressure has built enough that the point of what labor is trying to get across comes across, right? They're saying a lot about they're not looking for automation to expand. And in some respects, it's even been reported that perhaps they're even looking to claw back some of the automation or semi-automation that they had previously kind of almost agreed to. Certainly has to do with wages. The number being reported right now is 77% wage increase.
Yeah.
So over the next 6 years, that's a big increase, right? That's massive. So, I mean, there's some major issues that are kind of pending there. And one thing that I keep saying that I think we are starting to see the tail end of, but something that we've seen throughout various industries, and certainly the must work in person because it's hands-on work, has been the COVID happened. A whole bunch of people got sent home, but the essential worker didn't. And rightfully so. We appreciated a lot of industries that really bolstered the world right at the time. But one of the industries that really didn't get a lot of appreciation and probably still hasn't is I'd argue truckers, right? Over the road trucking. That was a major thing. There hasn't really been a national appreciation for that, even though we just had Trucker Week. And then the maritime workers. And I think that's this underlying thing. I don't know if that's a major issue here, but I said the same thing when the West Coast was going through their negotiation. And sure enough, they came out with their Heroes Fund, which is a one-time payment as a thank you for the work that was done during those COVID years.
Yeah, it's there's a lot to unpack about what you just said, and the Taft-Hartley Act. I found that the last time that was enacted was by George Bush in 2002 to avoid the work stoppage at the West Coast ports, and that their trade groups out there are begging the White House to step in right now. And then it is interesting, and again, this is just my opinion on this matter about that. Because Biden has been very pro labor, most pro union president out there. I mean, I believe he said it like hundreds of times and it's on record, so this isn't, you can fact check that if you want, but I think it's very telling that he's not stepping in. And, you could draw some parallels to some other events about that have happened here recently with him and maybe why he's not doing that. But I think it's very telling that nobody is stepping in, or at least publicly, when we're this kind of close to it, right? Because again, it's not one port we're talking about here, you guys, and we're not talking one industry that could be affected, right? Like the Port of Baltimore is known as like a break bulk port, so it's not like it's just one sector. Like we're talking everything is brought in on this, and it's not just the West Coast. It goes all the way up and around the Gulf Coast region into Texas as well. Houston, everything is bound to shut down. So I think we're at a kind of a standstill here until somebody balks. And I think like with the amount of economic pressure that we're talking about, because I saw something like $5+ billion a day is what is going to affect. Like that's not a small amount. And again, you guys, a lot of these sources, you guys have heard a little bank called JP Morgan and all this stuff. So you guys can go out there and research a lot of this stuff. But this is a very large economic impact that it could have out here. So, I want to talk about what happens if there is a complete stoppage. Like how are customers, all these people who have hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory on the water, how are they protected in this event that this does drag on? What should somebody do, Lauren, from your perspective? Like, hey, it's on strike, it's October 1st. What can they start documenting that day to make sure that they can recoup possibly anything if it gets to that point?
Yeah. So I saw the great interview yesterday with Sarah. You really guys, you both drilled down into how important documentation is, and documentation begins yesterday. The second best time is right now. Perhaps October 1 is a good time to start documenting. At any point is a good time. But what does that mean? So it's trying to recreate the story through proof. And so you might get to the end of this and say, well, the ports were closed. Well, how do you know they were closed, right? What maybe one area of the port was closed and that's where your container was. Perhaps the other area of the port was open. Perhaps they had a depot location where you could drop containers, right? Perhaps they were creating creative mechanisms to stay open despite no vessel traffic coming in. And so that's something you need to really pay attention to, those nuances. So the biggest thing, obviously follow the freight coach, pay attention, get involved, start listening to the news, follow JOC, follow, any of these reputable sources, and really anybody it's starting to hit the mainstream media. Thank goodness, because it really was quiet on the mainstream media side. And this has the potential to impact everybody. And I don't want to overinflate it too, because the October 1, we're not going to feel a lot of this when you go to the grocery store. But once you start getting into some of those fresh products, one of the biggest commodities that I've heard a lot of reports on recently is bananas.
Yep.
I know that I have some bananas that are miraculously brown overnight, right? I mean, and so that
happens.
And so if you have fresh products sent in that have an expiration date, you can't have them just sitting around. And so you might see bananas become part of the problem with only a 1-week stoppage of containers coming in. So how can you protect yourself? Look at your own terms and conditions. Look at any agreement that you are a part of, whether it's the tariff that you use of the carrier that's shipping your goods, whether it's the tariff or the service contract or whatever is binding your contract. Make sure that you understand that, because sometimes labor strikes are included in that. And if they are, you better know that, because it probably explains what is in there that you should know about. Sometimes it's not though. And actually it's a very fluid situation right now because a lot of the carriers are putting out notices about 30 days notice for surcharges. And so these surcharges might be they're named all sorts of things, but essentially they come down to the work disruptions of the East Coast and the Gulf. There are surcharges that they are proposing that will be effective on 30 days because that's an FMC requirement, that 30 days notice for a rate change. So pay attention to that. Find out what that means. When are those applied? When are they not applied? The diversion surcharge that we talked about before, when is that applied? When is it not applied? And then the best thing you can do is understand when it's applied and not applied right up front, but then keep that information because then once you get charged for it, make sure that matches up, right? I mean, that's what the FMC was trying to do with the detention and demurrage rule. Make it so that you can check the work of any invoices you receive because inevitably there's going to be mistakes and that happens, right? I mean, that happens across the board. I mean, even at the grocery store today, I was like, hey, I think she scanned my bananas twice. It's a banana day, I guess.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, the FMC is also watching. The Federal Maritime Commission is the independent regulatory agency. They are insulated from politics in that they are not at the beck and call of the administration. They are an independent agency. And so they are watching what's happening and they are ensuring the fair and fluid movement of goods through. I mean, there are three of one party, two of the other. So they do have kind of their political affiliations, but it's an independent regulatory agency, not a cabinet level agency. So they are independent in their decisions and in how they approach all of this. So they're trying to make sure that it's a fair, efficient system for the US consumer, importer, and exporter.
Yeah, I think, again, this is something, yeah, like I wasn't aware that the FMC was not. I thought it was an appointed position, to be honest with you. Anytime you see the word federal thrown out there, you think it's going to be that. So
it is appointed, and sorry to interrupt. It is appointed. It's appointed by the president, Senate confirmed. But the way that the Department of Transportation can be directed by the president, if the president were to say, "Hey, Federal Maritime Commission, I want you to do this," they have said, thanks for your suggestion. We'll take that under consideration. They don't have they're you can't tell us what to do, right? Is what they could say.
Yeah. So could any ports, and I know that this probably won't happen, like kind of like break rank here and say, no, we're not shutting down. Like if we do that, like it's going to be too crippling to the economy or to our local thing, because it's like, again, like it's not just, I know that the dock workers or, who the longshoremen or whatever, they're the ones who are striking, but like all the drayage carriers, all the other, and like there's so much ripple effect that comes through this. Could anybody or a few of the ports break rank from this and be like, no, we're not shutting down, we're staying open?
So potentially, right? And that's going to be a business decision on their part because, you certainly don't want to be in bad graces with the labor force that moves your goods and moves all of your boxes. So, I mean, drayage providers are available, right? I mean, and they if there's a box on a chassis and they can hook up to it, cool. But I mean, at some point you got to get that box off a stack and onto a chassis. And so that's where it becomes difficult because usually that's an ILA position that is moving that box from the stack or off the vessel to the yard. And so that's the really the kind of movement of the box itself is beholden to the ILA in those positions. And so if you don't have that, and that's the significance of this, if you don't have those people showing up to do that work, you may have all the other pieces ready, but like you don't have the box, right? Like it's like Santa coming with no presents. You need the presents to make it worth it.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And I think that, because like we move a pretty decent amount of containers out. And, I'm kind of looking at this and really thinking about like, because like I was in contact with my customer and putting a contingency plan in place here, like in the event that something happens, getting everything that they currently have that is available to get it pulled out. And then like what happens though? So are there like, does every port have to create like a designated staging area for all the other containers that are currently pulled from the port that need to be returned in the event that they shut down? Is there like a designated staging area? What does that look like?
So that's part of kind of the hedging your bets, right? Like how long will this last? And
Yeah.
so right now, the best thing everybody can do, like I said, first is go to the books, right? Check your documents, check all of the terms that you're currently bound by, and then check anything that might be part of like any of the guidance coming out from the carriers and the terminals directly, because sometimes the carriers and the terminals have different terms on free time, and make sure you know what terms you are bound by and your cargo is bound by. The other thing that especially the terminals are saying is get your stuff out of here, right? Like find out when those vessels are coming in, because there are, I mean, even just in New York, New Jersey, I believe they have 23 container ships scheduled to arrive before October 1st. I mean, that's more than normal. They're trying to fast steam basically all these vessels in so they can get worked, they can get the cargo boxes offloaded onto the yard, and then hopefully onto a chassis and out the door. Because the other thing to keep in mind is I've heard some warnings, and again, check this yourself, make sure that you know what's happening in your specific situation. But I've heard some warnings that if there's cargo boxes that are on demurrage, that are past free time and in demurrage, and the port shuts down, there's warnings that those will remain in demurrage even though you can't pick them up. Now, that is going to ultimately be a question. I think the applicability of that, the validity of that is going to be something that happens through the Federal Maritime Commission after this is, can you charge when a port is closed? There was a case on this that basically said you couldn't. That case got overturned. And so now it's a little bit gray area. Again, not legal advice directly, but it's a little bit of a gray area right now on, well, that case got overturned that said you can't charge when it's closed. So now the warning is potentially that if you are in free time and the port closes, you'll remain in free time despite, it's not going to go 2 more days and then you turn to demurrage because you couldn't get it out. You were in free time. But the warning is, if you're in demurrage right now, don't use that port as your warehouse. Grab that cargo box, get it out of there, because the danger is you may be rightfully charged demurrage. And the rightfully is what we're going to ultimately find out, I think, after all of this settles down. So the best thing you can do, check your documents and try to pull as much stuff away from the port as you can. With those empties, make sure that you're paying attention. As we go longer and longer into a strike, if it goes a few weeks and people have empties and their detention time is expiring, is there a depot? Is there a drop spot that the terminal has created? Because if there is and you don't take advantage of it, you potentially could be on the hook for that detention because there was an opportunity for you to return. Same thing with any of this. Like I said, create the story. The story is the biggest thing that you can do. If you are trying to continue the efficiency and the flow and the fluidity of goods, like if you are trying to pick up, because even though the vessels aren't arriving, they do have some cargo boxes that are available, and you're showing that you're checking every day to see if your box is available, because the port's not totally closed, but it's limited in how many boxes they can grab for you. Make sure that you're part of that, and make sure that you're somehow screenshotting or like write down a record book. Who knows what would actually get into evidence, but every day you check at 9 a.m. to see if your box is on the list of the 30 that are available for that day if we're in a strike, assuming that anything can even move, right? I mean, that's the thing. There's so many uncertainties here, but the best thing you can do is keep trying to be a problem solver, keep trying to figure out ways of working within the system. It's going to be very tedious and it's going to be very attention to detail. But as you're doing all of that work, make sure that you're writing it down. Make sure that you're finding a way of capturing what all you've done, because then if you get to the end of it and you have, heaven forbid it doesn't go 7 weeks, but in 1977, the last strike that we had on the East Coast was 7 weeks long. If you go 7 weeks and you were in demurrage, or maybe even September 30th was your last free day, and so there's a question on, did you kick over into demurrage October 1 or not? You can say, look, I tried my darndest on September 30th, but I could not get an appointment, or I could not get a drayage provider there. All the things you did on that last day before it went in, so you could say, I tried, I was unavailable. And so these 7 weeks of demurrage, right? Heaven forbid if that's the example, but these 7 weeks of demurrage, I shouldn't be responsible for because I tried on that last day. And that was my container came in that day or something, right?
Yeah.
Something that builds the argument. You're not the problem. You're not the reason why things went wrong for your specific situation. Obviously not legal advice.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then, so are these individuals, so like the customer, the buyer of goods from, in the United States here, do they go to their freight forwarder? Do they go directly to the port? who who's their first outreach here? I mean, because like again, if they've never been, because like most people have never been in this situation before, right? And then it's like there's a lot of moving parties there's a lot of parties involved in one container. You know, you have the customer here in the United States, the purchaser of the goods from China. Then you have the freight forwarder who's involved in that. Then you have the drayage carrier, you have the port, you have a broker, if there's a freight broker involved in that as well. So if I purchased and I have a container sitting out on the water that could be affected by this, who do I go to first?
So, I mean, if you have a well, first I would say go check any public statements. Like if you know that your containers are on a Maersk vessel, go check the Maersk website to see what announcements they're making. If you know that your containers are coming into the port of New York, New Jersey, go check New York, New Jersey's website, see what announcements they're making for customer advisories or whatever, so that you kind of already know, because you're wasting valuable time of those you're calling if you don't already know the baseline public information, right? And so that's the first step, is just make sure that you're keeping aware of what your specific terminal and carrier are saying on this, because you might solve some problems and answer some questions that way. If you still don't really know what's going on there, if you did go through a freight forwarder, if you did go through somebody who was arranging the movement of your goods, certainly call them. They may not know, but if you've started at step one and you've kind of checked the public releases of customer advisories, and it's just on their website, I'm sure it's going to be like the first thing that you see, or under the news releases. But go to your freight forwarder if you went through a freight forwarder, right? Some sort of travel agent of cargo. If you went through someone like that, talk to them. See if there's anything that you can do. See if there might be some extra charges, but that's where you're hedging your bets again, right? That's a business decision. Do you get charged to expedite the movement of your goods out? Or do you risk it and say, I think I'm good. I'm going to stay in free time. My stuff's not going to expire. And I think this will only go a week. That's a bet, right? That's a business decision bet. And if you're still not totally satisfied, the other thing you can do is find somebody like me who can help you navigate through all of it, right? Well, there's consultants out there, and I'm a maritime attorney, so what I help do is kind of consult and navigate the things that are happening around the port from the legal perspective. So I kind of know the rules of the game of what's happening, the options you have when things go wrong at the end. But like, you don't want to be at that side when you first call that attorney. You want to be on the front end of it, and you really kind of want to be helping to navigate the documentation, all of that stuff, right? Like someone that you can just ask a question. Okay, where do I check next?
Yeah, no, it's that's so valuable. I mean, I don't have anything to add onto that, because it is just like, this is such a unique potential situation, right? Now I want to emphasize on potential, because in the event, like, they could very well strike an agreement at any given moment.
Anytime.
There could be enough pressure, economic and political pressure put on everybody, where they're like, hey, we're going to do a 90-day, grace period where we're going to continue. We will get it done in the next 90 days, but we're not going to shut down. That could very well happen. And, as close as we are to November and the election, I'm kind of surprised that nothing has been done, because like, this is a very, at least from my perspective, from a political standpoint, this is a very bad situation if you're a candidate and you're trying to loud yourself as a pro-union candidate and you're not out there doing anything about this. So yeah, again, that's just my opinion on
Yeah,
that.
I mean, so there is a little bit of the ILA. They released a video. President Daggett of the ILA released a video. It was over 20 minutes long, and basically he also shot out some warnings to the administration saying, don't get involved here. This is between private parties. If you get involved and if you force us to work, then we're going to slow down our work. So that's another thing to be cognizant of, is it doesn't have to be the hammer response of go back to work. But if we do get that hammer response, you might have a slowdown of goods. It might be a slow restart unless we get a full negotiated agreement. And even then, it's going to be a slow dig out depending on how long this goes. They can just force them into mediation. That doesn't necessarily, do the whole Taft-Hartley. And that's where the labor secretary can come in. And that's what happened with the ILWU. It was month 11, but she came in and said, let's sit down, let's encourage everybody to talk. And that's the thing that most of those 200 plus associations are calling for right now, is these two parties haven't spoken in a formal sit down since June. And so the associations are saying, at least encourage them to sit down. And that's where I think that the administration really hasn't been present. And that's what's being called for.
I love it, Lauren. And as much as I love having you on the show, like, I hope you're not like on here next week because like everything did. Like, I hope that, the next time we come on, it's like, hey, crisis was avoided here and everything else. Because like, again, like it could turn into a very serious matter here very quickly because, again, we're not talking about one port here, you guys. We're talking about like literally 70% of the ports in the United States. And that is not a small number at all. Again, I always like to caveat, I went to public school, so take everything I say with a grain of salt on that. But Lauren, how does anybody reach out to you to find out more?
Sure. So themaritimeprofessor.com or my law firm is squallstrategies.com. Happy to talk to anybody, and I'm very active on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Lauren, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, you guys, if you guys got value in what you heard, which I know you did, subscribe to the show. You guys share it out there to your network, because if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking.